All right. So let's go across to are you able to see the whiteboard now?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So what we are going to do is obviously look at doing a bit of discussion in terms of the assignment brief. Now here, when we look at the assignment brief, what we want to be able to do is, look at what has been, approved by Pearson with regards to, the unit. And then there are two assignments that we are looking at in terms of, the assignment brief in particular. So what we will do is, let me show you the assignment brief and then we'll come back to the whiteboard in a minute. But here is essentially what we will do is go to the full screen for a minute. And then you see everything in terms of, the unit specification, which is here. You also see what is called the assignment brief part 1 of the unit, and then assignment brief part 2 of the unit. Now, here is the way we would go about essentially, looking at doing the assignment. Now, there are bits and pieces in terms of why when you do your assignment, this document, which is called the US, is also going to be quite unit specification, is going to be quite useful because you are going to be able to use some of the, indicative content which is given here and bring that into your evidence as a Word document. Now, in this case, both the assignments that you have to do, they will specify a particular type of summation format and an output. So here in this first part of the assignment, which is submission part here, it says that you are required to use and provide what is called a comparative analysis and impact statement report. So this is going to be a Word document with a word limit of about 2,000 to 2,500 words. And plus minus 10% is normally allowed. So if you submit a report, about say 2,000 words, that'll be acceptable. If you submit something like 2,750, that'll also be acceptable. Anything beyond that, the idea is to try and restrict because it increases your similarity or plagiarism, and then you have to paraphrase or appropriately reference the work. Now, in the assignment, there is a scenario which is normally given. So scenario would typically be a case study in this case, and there are two case studies which are given. One is a case study on Samsung, and the other is a case study on Green Health, which is a company which is undergoing, merger. So there's a bit of an introduction and a scenario given on that for the purposes of, studying that. Now, in Pearson, because this is the first session probably you're attending on assignment discussion, what tends to happen in Pearson is we don't have the tasks labeled as P1, P2, although they are there, but the reference in terms of the reference to the tasks, which is the assessment grid given towards the end of the assignment brief, is only for informational purposes. We don't say that this is a task to do P1, this is a task to do P2, M1, and distinction. The idea here is a holistic approach that you would need to, after going through the two case studies, because it involves the part 1 of the assignment involves a comparative report. So you need to have two companies or two organizations that you're going to compare, and what products they sell or what services they offer, and then why they are, looking at making changes. So here, there are 6 bullet points or 6 tasks in a way which are given. And when you start doing the assignment, you would probably look at writing the task down and then producing the evidence or writing the evidence underneath that task. Now, when you do these 6 tasks which are set, it holistically covers this particular grid, which is P1, P2, P3, P4, pass criteria, M1 and M2, and D1. Now, in order to ensure that you are hitting that criteria, so for example, if you want to hit a merit grade or a distinction grade, then what you have to do is basically the reason of paying and giving them here in the assignment brief is so that you are able to see what it is asking for. So when it comes to making recommendations, there is a part of it which will say that after doing the comparative analysis or, between the two organizations, you're required to evaluate and make recommendations. So here, the process of making the recommendations are going to be basis some influence to what is being given here. And what is given here is actually covered in learning outcome 1 and 2. So using the unit specification brief and the assignment brief, which is this one, AB, is important to be able to cover the assignment as a whole. And that is why the approach is a holistic approach. The holistic approach also means that at some stage when you do your assignment and you submit, it'll be down to us to make the judgments in terms of to see whether you're hitting all these assessment criteria, P1, P2, M1, and D1. So in these tasks that we have given out here, we are covering all the assessment criteria for pass, merit, and distinction. Or when you submit, it is down to the assessor to see the evidence that you produce and the material that you have provided. Is it meeting a meeting or hitting that criteria or not? And if you attempt this in totality, what it also means is that even if you're not meeting the criteria in the first instance, when we give you feedback, we have ensured that you have actually ensured that you have done coverage for all the tasks. Because previously to the approach that this is now looking into, what used to happen was when the assignment briefs were designed, they were designed and clear. The tasks were written out very clearly: P1, P2, P3, P4, P5, M1, M2. And if the learners had decided that I'm only going to pass and I'm only going to attempt the pass criteria, they looked at it as an additional task. So what Pearson has done is done away with that approach. And what they do is we give you a scenario or a case study, or in some cases, this is some sort of a background to look at for attempting the task, and they are attempted holistically so that you are attempting all the criteria, whether it's pass, merit, and distinction. And this would ensure that you have a good chance and a probability of standing, a good chance to be able to achieve the highest possible grade. Because if you had not attempted, say, for example, if you do assignment 1 and you only attempt the P tasks or pass tasks, and you do the assignment 2, then when we have to look at summative judgment on overall grade, because you attempted only pass tasks here and you've done pass and merit on this one, second assignment, you can't still achieve an overall merit because you've not attempted the merit criteria as given in the part 1 of the assignment. So this approach led to a lot of confusion. Students obviously, coming back and saying they're not happy with the grade, or, those kind of, confusions used to happen. And that have been done away with this because the assignment briefs are now designed holistically, taking into mind this assessment grid. And this assessment grid, when the assignment is designed, and the tasks are given, they cover all the assessment criteria. So if the student's work is meeting it, he is submitting, or he or she is submitting the work, it is going to be able to hit the highest grade. At the same time, if you don't make changes and you assuming go ahead with that submission itself, and you don't make the changes, your minimum assignment will be needing to meet a pass criteria to be able to pass this unit. The other bit that you have to keep in mind is in Pearson, a student can actually fail one unit, and you will still be awarded the diploma towards the end. And that is a diploma which is awarded using compensation, for the unit that you have not cleared. Although your credits will be judged as 220 or say, 225, because depending on the unit that you fail, if you fail, assuming this is just for understanding, you still get the diploma awarded, but your credits overall will be lesser than the unit that you have failed. So typical Pearson awards diplomas when you achieve 240 credits, but assuming a student has failed a unit because of plagiarism, not meeting the criteria, or, after the formative feedback also not being able to turn the assignment around, and that unit is judged as fail, that would mean you still have the full diploma qualification awarded, but the credits will be lower with the weightage of the credit of the unit that you have not managed to pass. And that is called compensation by pass. So here, sometimes you would have that opportunity or that particular anomaly applied as well. one last thing. In Pearson, what tends to happen is if you fail a unit, you're also given a reset. And then when you get a reset assignment, that is going to be entirely different from the one that you're seeing now. And that would mean that when you submit that reset assignment, it will essentially be capped at a pass mark only. So that means you won't be able to achieve a higher grade on that particular assignment wherein you failed it, and you're then having to reset and do a second assignment, and that would be a smaller version and related to only the past tasks. This is something that you have to keep in mind when you look at approaching Pearson assignments in the course, because this is going to be one of the first ones or the second one that you're going to be submitting as far as the unit is concerned. Now, when this is a good practice which I will share, that if I was in your shoes and I was doing the assignment, I would primarily have the unit specification with me, and I'll have the assignment brief with me, because when I look at the tasks, sometimes if I don't understand what is being asked for, then what I can do is I know in the assignment brief, this task, this assignment brief relates to the assessment criteria LO1 and LO2 only. So in this case, what tends to happen is that when I do the assignment, I will be looking at referring to learning outcome 1 and learning outcome 2. And if you have the unit specification with you, then you clearly know what is the content that is being covered in the assignment brief, and that is given as an indicative content under the essential content here for each of the learning outcomes. So we know exactly you're going to be writing precisely, and you'll be covering the points which are required to be covered, rather than covering or beating around the bush or faffing around in the sense, okay, let me think, let me go to Google, or let me look at this. The idea would be to look at the indicative or essential content here and go into our presentations to see what coverage has been done for these particular topics. Now, with that in mind, we will go into the discussion of the assignment brief. So the assignment brief have an issue date, which is 15th April for the first assignment, and the second one is 25th of April. This has a submission date of 9th of May, and the other one has a submission date of 15th of May. Now, once you submit your assignment, the assessor is going to assess it. You're going to get some feedback on it if it meets the criteria. And when you submit your assignment, you're also going to submit with a narration in the email to say that kindly find my assignment for this unit. I'm looking at achieving merit or a distinction or a pass grade, and depending on the grade that you're trying to achieve, the assessor will look at the evidence that you've presented, and with that evidence, he's going to mark it, and then marking, when it is done, it is annotated as comments on the right hand side. You'll be able to see comments. For example, if I just give you an example here, so there'll be comments which will be visible in terms of what has been given to you as a feedback, whether you met the criteria or not met the criteria. These comments are not visible on the mobile device. You'll have to open them on a Word in your Word document on a PC, laptop, or a Mac, and that would allow a full screen display to happen. And that is where the review or the commenting side of that will be visible. Now, if there is some bits which are missing, there is feedback even to say elaborate. It will be slightly directive to say, can you look at elaborating on this part? Can you look at referring to this slide and then revising it or elaborating it? And that would then allow you to go ahead and resubmit that assignment after the formative feedback. Formative is ongoing feedback. So it is not a final feedback, it's ongoing feedback. And that would allow you to go and achieve the grade and the task, and as a result, the whole of the unit. So this is how the feedback process essentially, would work. Now, because I don't make this up in terms of, the centers don't make this up in terms of, because when we look at the assignment briefs, there is a clear differentiation given that there's a line here, as you can see. So we clearly know that the first assignment is learning outcome 1 and 2, and the second assignment is learning outcome 3 and 4, because there's a line across it. And obviously this is specified, in the unit and the resources which are provided to us. Now, one last thing before we go into the assignment. Have you signed in to HN Global? Have you taken and signed in to HN Global as a student? So if you haven't signed on to this platform, taken subscription, this is free for the students who are actually doing the Pearson H&D programs. So this is an absolute free platform which Pearson has. and it will provide learning resources that you are going to be able to use to be able to do your assignments. Now, there are these resources are going to be in addition to what we have provided. So essentially speaking, when you log into this particular platform, what will happen is that at some stage the login is free, but at some stage what will happen is you'll need to go into the business side of things and look at a Pearson book, which I'm going to show you in a second, and that would allow you to access some material which Pearson provides for the study of this particular unit. And we have a teacher's login, and you will have a student's login on this side. And that would allow you to essentially, visit this platform to get hold of additional resources. Not sure why this is not loading up, but this we'll come back to it in a bit. And these resources are also available for you to be able to use and read for the purposes of doing the assignment. Now, in the first assignment, just very briefly, the structure side of things. So when you look at the assignment brief, obviously some bits and pieces are coming from the unit itself in terms of the aims and objectives, which are given here. And what you would need to do at some stage would be, if I put it this way, that on some stage, when you look at the assignment, what you're looking at is going through the assignment brief first in a bit of detail. And that detail that you go through should allow you to understand what the assignment brief is asking you to do. Now, in this case, when we look at the assignment brief, you are going to see that the assignment brief has a bit of an introduction, which is coming from the introduction of the unit. So I'm going to put this here, just quickly updating the introduction. Now, after that, there's a general information, which basically gives you information about what the unit is, where can you find the teaching and learning material, and the resources for it on the Moodle, which is UK Versity Moodle, and also on HN Global. The submission format is very clearly specified. The submission format tells you what is the output, what is the word limit that you need to have on the assignment. Obviously, all assignments are going to be following the Harvard system of referencing. Plagiarism-wise, we are looking at not more than 20% in terms of similarity. So this is the bit that you need to understand on plagiarism. There are some recommended books which are coming from the unit specification given here, and they would be also available to you on Moodle from us. And some of the books are also available, as resources on the HN Global platform. So when we go to the HL Global platform, when you log in, you should be able to get hold of some of these books, essentially, from Pearson. Now, in my case, I log in as a teacher. In your case, you should be able to log in as a student. And if you haven't already subscribed or, logged into it, then you can log in and choose UK Versity. It'll ask you your registration number with the Pearson that you have with us and the center that you're studying. And that should allow you to get resources pretty much quickly, instantly. Now, when you log in, you're going to be going to the business subjects, and in business subjects, look at the business side of things, which is the H&D business that you're doing. And obviously here is where you would, this is my resource. Obviously, we find this here, but some of the resources that you would get on your side would be available in the learning zone. And they would be things like books, there are some webinars, and there are some articles and journals which Pearson provides, and they could be related to all the units that you're studying, and they would be available to you from this particular, let's say the portal. Now, from my point of view, when you look at the, assignment brief going further, this part is part 1, which is covering learning outcome 2. There is a scenario which will be there in the assignment brief. And with the scenario towards the end, you're going to see certain tasks which are given to be covered. And these tasks will essentially be looking at hitting all the assessment criteria for learning outcome 1 and 2. And that would be the structure and the format of the assignment brief across all the units that you're going to study as far as Pearson is concerned. Now, let's go into the assignment in general in terms of what it talks about. So the assignment 1 has a title of Drivers of Change in Organizational Impact, and the assignment 2 has a title of Leadership and Change Management. Now here, what we are looking in learning outcome 1 and 2, which basically talk about producing a comparative analysis of different types and drivers of change in business. Now, because we're going to discuss assignment 1, I'm just going to limit it to the first assignment, so that you are able to see a bit more bigger and obviously a bit more clearer. Let me put it this way. That's the assignment 1. And if I magnify this, let me just make the screen a bit bigger. So here is where we are going to be looking at understanding and looking at doing this particular assignment. So if I was in your shoes and I was looking at doing this assignment, I would understand that the first overarching thing which the assignment brief is going to ask me to do is produce a comparative analysis. And at some stage, there will be some assessment criteria in it. The second learning outcome is talking about evaluating the impact of change on organizational behavior. So this bit is going to be useful for us to understand what is it that the output is requesting me to create as an evidence for the assignment. Now, let's look at the scenario. So what we have done is we've looked at 2 case studies, and the reason of case studies is that in order for you to do comparative analysis, you need to be able to understand what are the 2 organizations and information in detail to be understood what is being asked for in terms of comparative analysis. Although we clearly know because of the learning outcome that the comparative analysis is on different types and drivers of change. So when we talk about different types, we mean change, whether it's planned or emergent, initiated or imposed. And when we talk about drivers of change, we are looking at whether these drivers are internal to the organization or external to the organization, and whether these drivers are impacting the organization in terms of change positively, negatively. Is it asking for transformation in terms of a change, or whether it's asking or having an impact in terms of the way organization is looking at dealing with that change? So that could be globalization, technological change. It could be transformational change, and that is what we will be looking at fishing out by reading the case study of one Samsung and the second Green Health Cranberry, which is primarily a second company. Now, what we are looking at is going through this case study in a bit more detail. And the case study you have to read and then underline, or I would say highlight some of the key areas that you have actually understood by reading the case study. At some stage, what we will need to do sorry about this. There's somebody at the door. The second case study basically looks at, a strategic case study, which is basically about merger. That means this company, Green Health, is undergoing merger with Cranberry, and it is where we are looking at studying the 2 companies and how the companies have decided to, merge. And this particular case study talks about breaking the, details up into introduction, rationale of the merger, what was Green Health doing before the merger, and then how would Cranberry, Cranberry and Greenberry's collaborated working would work under the merger. So there is a bit of conversational, remarks or, case, let's say, scripts which are given, which primarily describe the circumstances under which this merger has been conceived and what is the opinion in terms of why the merger is happening. And the case study then concludes towards the end saying that what will happen next in terms of after the merger is complete, where the focus is going to be for the combined operations in terms of target market and customers, and how will the people respond to this particular merger. So you have to do a bit of reading to be able to understand the aspects of how this merger is going to work. And this particular background gives you details about the types of change which is happening because of the merger, and then what are the drivers which have driven the company to look at mergers in the first instant. And that is what we are going to be looking at from a perspective of the the case studies. Now, once you've read these 2 case studies, what we need to be able to do is, if I put this out, what we have to do is obviously look at creating our own Word document. And that Word document, primarily, if I start with sharing my screen again, Just copying a couple of bits first to give it a bit of shape in terms of what the title is and what the assignment part is. What I would do is primarily towards the end, copy, some of the bits here, which are the tasks which I have required to do. Give it, let me just quickly format the document and I'll share my screen with you in a second. So when we look at, these two cases that we have done, what we want to be able to look at is identify what are the drivers within, affecting what are the drivers and what is the change which is essentially happening as far as Samsung is concerned. So what I will do is if I look at a bit of, let me just put this across. And then we'll share my screen in a second. So the second organization that we have is Green Health and Cranberry. Let's look at these two, just showing you a bit in terms of how you would go about doing this. So here we go. Okay, now if I just share my screen in terms of what am I doing with regards to, structuring the assignment. So here we go. So first things first, when you look at this particular document, what I'm trying to do is basically give it a shape of an assignment. So I'm going to look at basic bits in terms of just very briefly, because again, it's the first time. So what I will do is primarily go in and, put things like, your name of the program. So Pearson. So I'll put Pearson BTEC H&D business. Then I'll put my name here. And then I'll put, my registration number. So P456892, whatever that is. And then I'll put the unit name, which is coming here. And then the assignment that I'm doing. And what I will do is structure that out like a bit of a cover page. That's what I'm trying to do. And I'm going to insert a page break here. So this for me becomes a bit of a cover page. And what I would want to do is, look at making it look like a cover page for the assignment, insert some page numbers into this particular bit. And then one second. So here is where, I would basically structure the assignment. That's the first task. So what I've done is it talks about the interaction of drivers and impact of change and how it affects, organizational strategy. So what I did was when I started to do the assignment, what I'd done was essentially started to do it as a bit of a sample. And I have started to put this together in terms of, evidence. So let me just do page insert references. And if I just format that slightly. So in my case, what I would do is the first task is asking me to look at a bit of an introduction to drivers and impact of change. Now, what I've done is before I talk about change, I've started to do a bit of an introduction about Samsung as a company. Then I've got into reading the case study, and from the case study, I've extracted some bits of information that what is Samsung into in terms of its main product, and business functions. And then I've looked at identifying that Samsung as a company has product services like, mobile devices, semiconductors, and consumer electronics. And I've looked at, and I've from the case study started to look at the key bits of changes which consumers are asking for in its products, and those are driving the changes within Samsung. So what I've done is started to write about, after researching a bit about Samsung and the changes which are happening in the company, I've given a bit of an introduction here, and then I've done the same thing for Green Health, which is a fictional, obviously a healthcare organization, and I've looked at assuming creatively some of the things that they are doing. Again, what are the changes which are happening because of technological advancement. And the reason why I've taken technological advancement here is because if I go back to the indicative content, that is where, the indicative content becomes important. Because if I go back into the indicative content, what you're going to see is that the indicative content gives me details about what needs to be discussed when we talk about the impact of drivers of change. So technology is driving the change, and that is what I've looked at in the assignment part of it in terms of my introduction that I'm, starting with the first task. Then I've looked at Cranberry, again, a food company, which is fictional. And there I've identified some background, some major drivers of change, and then essentially talking about what is the impact of the change in terms of the factors which is affecting the company. And then towards the end, I've drawn a bit of a summary. Now, here is what I've done, primarily written evidence in the form of, say, about maybe give or take 1,000 words to cover the first task, which sets the background, or let me put it this way, sets the foundation in terms of what I'm going to discuss and talk about in the assignment with regards to this particular unit. Now, because we cannot discuss anything and we have to follow some sort of a remit, what we have to look at is be very closely referring to what is called the essential content given in the unit specification. And this essential content allows us not to dither away to basically let me rephrase that. This essential content allows us to stay close to what is being asked for to be covered in the learning outcomes and in the assessment criteria. Now, the second part of the task says, can you do me an overview of the organizations in this case study? So here, the case study that we have provided, the reason of providing such a detailed case study is that you should be able to summarize what is the overview of these organizations, and that is to be covered in as far as the second task is concerned. The third task, if you recall, we have covered a lot of frameworks. We have covered PESTEL, we have covered SWOT and TOWS, which is TOWS, another version of how SWOT analysis is applied to discuss and cover internal factors. And they have to be applied here in terms of these two organizations, both Samsung / Green Health and Cranberry. And then you have to start discussing and elaborating on some of these tasks in order for you to meet the criteria for the do all the 6 tasks, and that is where you will be ending up submitting or completing your assignment to submit for the first draft feedback. And then whichever places that you are taking the material from. So in my case, when I started to look at certain resources outside which have been recommended here by Pearson, and also some of the resources that I've used in making the presentations. I've looked at those resources, collected in essential and useful information from there, and those have been paraphrased and then written in the form of the evidence that I'm putting on the Word document after studying the case studies, and for which I'm appropriately putting a reference list here in terms of ensuring that the data that I've compiled is factual and is accurate and it is appropriately referenced. So in some cases, what you also do is you do bibliography. And the reason I suggest that we write bibliography is that sometimes if I'm reading something and I'm paraphrasing and writing it in my own words, then you're telling us the sources from which you have taken the information, and then you've written it in your own words. And in those cases, it will be termed as bibliography. But in some cases, wherein you are actually taking the extracts of the text or definitions or key frameworks, pictures, diagrams, photos, images, tables, they are to be referenced as it is, because you're giving credit to the author or the publisher or the scientist or the psychologist or the author in terms of, the physiologist, whatever it is, people who have authored that particular material. And in those cases, sometimes you cannot alter the text because it's a definition or it's a key framework. So you have to pick them as it is. And that is where you will use Harvard referencing. That means you'll give the credit to the author, and that would be looking at referencing, and that referencing would appear towards the end of the sentence or end of the paragraph, and they would be elaborated towards the end in terms of a reference list. So this is how you would go about doing the assignment, for the first part. And then similarly, you will be looking at doing it for the second part. Now, when you submit the assignment, it's expected that, some bits of it, you are aware, you need to format it in such a way that, the assignment is, presentable and is structured, and it allows, the assessor to assess and give you feedback as far as the assignment is concerned. So you can draw up a table of contents towards the end as you finish your work, and that then can be, presented, in the form of, say, a table of content in a document that you normally send across, via email. So here, if I draw a table of content, essentially, it will be all done through the Word document. And as you can see, this will give me a detailed idea of how you have gone about doing the assignment. Any questions on this, Faizan?
No, I don't have any. Thanks.
All right. So basically, both the assignment briefs that we've got with us today are going to be up on Moodle. And what I would suggest is go about attempting the assignment and then creating drafts for it and then sending it over for feedback. And that would allow us essentially to, give you commentary to say whether you're doing it right, whether you're following the assignment brief, and you're able to produce the output as per what is required in terms of the extended, expected format. The second part of the assignment involves a 10-minute PowerPoint presentation with 5 minutes towards the end, for Viva or VOS, which is basically some question answer sessions. So in this case, you're going to be producing a presentation, but the presentation primarily is going to be also having what is called speaker notes. So if I look at this assignment in totality, when you submit assignment 1 and 2, assignment 1 is going to be a Word document. Assignment 2 is going to be a PowerPoint presentation with some speaker notes. And this PowerPoint presentation, if I open one up, what will happen is when you start designing the presentation towards the end, under the slides, there is a provision for where you can add speaker notes. So here is where you're going to be adding speaker notes to explain that this is what is the, what I'm speaking about in terms of the bullet points. And that would allow you to, summarize, your assignment for the, second part. So you could also do the speaker notes on, Word document. That is not an issue. But my suggestion here would be to look at, obviously putting your name down, the name of the unit, and obviously the title, so that, it is clearly identifiable that this is the second part of the assignment. And what you do is insert a couple of slides. Now, in the second part of the assignment, it covers learning outcome 3 and 4. The scenario remains the same. So I've not replicated the scenario in the second part of the assignment. It says using the case studies presented in assignment 1 is to investigate and explain barriers to change and the influence it has had on decision making of leaders in the chosen organization. So you could choose from Green Health, from Cranberry or Samsung, and choose an organization to discuss the force field analysis and the variety of management change theories that we discussed. A nudge theory, for example, we discussed. There were 3 theories in particular. So the nudge theory in particular, we discussed. The second theory was, one second. So we also discussed the systems theory, the continuous improvement theory, which was a part of learning organizations and learning outcome 2, and towards the last learning outcome, the nudge theory and the influencing behaviors. So here we also looked at the Shine's cultural model, and that could be referred. But the main emphasis is on how the change is implemented and what are the forces which are driving those change, and how does the leadership, react and create, let's say, opportunities for that change to be applied in the organization. And here is where we are going to be looking at the change models, which is the Kurt Levin's change model, which is the first one, 3 steps of changes, the Kotter's 8-step model, and we'll be looking at also understanding the McKinsey's 7S model. So you could use any of these, and that is what you're going to be looking at covering, in the presentation. These are the 5 points. So introduction to the case study organization could be a bit repetitive. This will come across, from your previous assignment wherein you're doing a bit of introduction, but the introduction will change because you're addressing the introduction of the organization to discuss learning outcome 3 and 4. So instead of discussing about what is the organization, what products and services they sell and things like that, you're going to be discussing how that organization in the introduction looks at in finding out what forces are driving or basically driving for change within the organization, and if there are any resisting factors or opposing forces opposing the change which the organization's leadership is trying to do. So introduction will be contextualized to the introduction related to learning outcome 3 and 4. The second part is going to be the application of force field analysis. This is what I have then given a template of in the Moodle. There is a template on force field analysis. It's a Word document. You can download the document. You can copy and paste the document. And, if it is difficult to do it on the PowerPoint slide, you can actually do that, fill that template up of force field analysis, and that would allow you to look at task 2. Task 3 is going to be evaluation or basically explanation of the barriers which are affecting the change. And here is where what you're going to do is put some bullet points for each of these tasks, and then explain these tasks in the speaker notes. So if I look at a brief shell, this is how the brief shell would be, for the presentation. And what we are going to do is, for this presentation, we're going to organize what is called a Viva session, which will happen with Zoom like this. And this particular session, in which what will happen is you will go about presenting the slides of this particular unit, and then what you're talking and explaining about the slide, the bullet points that you've written here would be mentioned in the speaker notes. And after you've done the presentation, what I will then do as a tutor is ask you questions on what has been presented, and successfully answering those questions and explaining them would help cover the second part of the assignment, which is related to learning outcome 3 and learning outcome 4. So this particular part would involve you making a PowerPoint presentation. In PowerPoint presentation, you could also go about doing recording of the slides when you're making it. So in the PowerPoint, there are options wherein you can actually do a recording of the slideshow, wherein you are actually explaining the slides, and that recording can be done along with once you've made the presentation, you can actually explain the presentation in your own terms at your end, and then press record here, which would essentially record, the whole presentation as if you were presenting to an audience. Like I press record right now, and it has started to record this particular presentation And this presentation recording, when I press record here, as you can see, it will record as if I'm giving or delivering this presentation to an audience. I can switch on the video. The mic is switched on. If you want to keep the recording, to a lower bandwidth in terms of size, you could start the video initially for a couple of seconds to give an introduction, and then you can switch the video off and then just run the presentation, record it, and that would allow you to, essentially go about, explaining the slides and also going through some of the speaker notes in terms of what you've covered, and that would meet the criteria for the assignment 2. Make sure you include relevant references, because the references are important, and this is something which is going to provide proof that the work that you have compiled is factual and accurate, and that would be verified by going through some of the references given towards the end of your slide. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So what I can do is I'm going to send you this 2 documents that I've started to create just as a bit of a sampler, presentation, which is part 2 of the assignment, sample or sampler, and then the part 1, which is basically this Word document, again, to give you an idea that this is, something that you can look at when you start looking at doing the assignment for this particular unit. Good stuff. So there are dates given on the assignment brief, and that would allow you to essentially go about submitting them for the purposes of assessment. And then once we give you feedback, if there are changes required to be done, they can be done. And then the assignment can be finalized for a final grade. And then it'll be, also given to the internal verifier, who would essentially confirm the grade and the achievement of that unit. And then this is kept aside. You have all these documents as and with annotative comments as proof for your own record and safekeeping. And when it comes to certification, this unit, obviously will be then sent across along with the other work that you submit as you keep submitting for the purposes of overall certification of the course. Any questions at this stage, Faizan? Any questions, any further questions, any queries, any doubts?
No questions, thanks.
Okay, good stuff. So I'm going to end the session here, and then we're going to look at starting the next unit, next week, not this week. I'm going to start the unit next week, and that is going to be a different unit. I think the session which you have scheduled for, I'm going to look at checking with everyone if they are able to join, then we can start tomorrow. But otherwise, the next unit that we are looking at doing is, global business environment. So this particular unit is the next unit that we're going to study. Now,